By 2006, the Nintendo DS was no longer the bizarre two-screened handheld that Nintendo first unveiled. It was now the king of the video game market, with multiple best-selling titles already under its belt. With Nintendo preparing the launch of another system, it seemed like nothing could stop the DS from continuing to dominate the portable gaming market. But it would only be a matter of time before a new challenger entered. This is the story of the Nintendo DS. In this part, we'll be taking a look at some of the most notable games to come out on the DS from late 2006 to 2009, as well as another one of the DS's revisions. We'll also be discussing the introduction of smartphones and how they affected the Nintendo DS. The DS was on top of the world throughout 2005 and 2006. With best-selling titles and a remodel of the system out on store shelves, many wondered how much longer Nintendo would support the Game Boy Advance. The failure of the Game Boy Micro was the beginning of the end for Nintendo's long dominant handheld line. A few big series would headline the system's lineup in 2005, with The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap and Pokemon Emerald version being critical and commercial successes. 2006, on the other hand, would see few notable titles. Outside of licensed games and ports, many developers were setting their sights on the Nintendo DS and Sony's PSP. 2007 saw an even smaller amount of Game Boy Advance titles released. Samurai Deeper Kyo released on February 12, 2008 in North America. This marked the final title released for the Game Boy Advance in North America, although Nintendo would not officially discontinue the system until 2010. With the Game Boy withering in late 2005, Nintendo began to focus much of their marketing towards their upcoming home console, the Nintendo Revolution. The Revolution, like the Nintendo DS, did not feature cutting-edge graphical power. It relied on motion controls, similar to the Nintendo DS's touchscreen and two-screen capabilities. The Revolution, later titled the Wii, would become a bastion for the casual gaming market, but Nintendo tapped into this market months before the Wii would release. In mid-2006, Nintendo introduced a new branding for many of their more casual gamer-focused titles. Touch Generations was launched, thanks in part to the success of titles like Brain Age, to bring more consumers on board with the Nintendo DS. Games under the Touch Generations banner focused less on action or heavy plots, with many of them fitting neatly into the genre of puzzle games. Touch Generations launched alongside Big Brain Academy and Magnetica on June 5, 2006. Touch Generations became a big success, with Nintendo using the marketing moniker for some Wii titles like Endless Ocean. Reprints of older titles like Brain Age were updated with the branding as well. While the titles attached to the Touch Generation branding were huge successes, Nintendo decided against using them beyond the Nintendo DS and Wii era of games, with the branding ending in 2011 before the launch of the Nintendo 3DS. There were still plenty of great games coming to the Nintendo DS in late 2006 and early 2007. Castlevania received a new entry with Portrait of Ruin in December of 2006, Kirby made his platforming debut with Kirby Squeak Squad, and the main Pokemon series came to the handheld with Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Another Nintendo DS series launched in February 2007 with Professor Layton and the Curious Village. But one major Nintendo series had yet to come to the handheld, and 2007 was going to change that. At the Game Developers Conference in 2006, Nintendo revealed the next entry in their famous Legend of Zelda series for the Nintendo DS, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. Featuring cel-shaded graphics and an overhead view, Phantom Hourglass's developers had one goal in mind: using the DS's capabilities to their fullest extent. The game would use everything, from drawing a path for your boomerang on the touchscreen, to charting the course of your ship with the stylus, to using the microphone and top screen for various puzzles. Fans wouldn't have to wait long. The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass was slated for release later that year. Like with many Zelda games, great ambition takes time. Nintendo later delayed the title out of 2006 and into 2007 for all territories. Japan received the game first, when it released in May of 2007, with other territories seeing a release in October of that year. Nintendo heavily promoted the game upon launch, even releasing a special edition Nintendo DS Lite alongside the game. Critical reception was positive for the title. Taking place after the events of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, Link is tasked with rescuing Tetra, who went missing after entering a ghost ship on the high seas. The entire game is controlled through the touchscreen, with the player moving their stylus across the screen to dictate the direction Link will move in. Combat is handled by tapping on enemies for Link to strike with his sword. Phantom Hourglass walked away with multiple awards by the end of 2007, including Nintendo DS Game of the Year from multiple outlets. Gamers were excited for the title as well, as it went on to sell more than 4 million copies worldwide. It was the best-selling Legend of Zelda game for a handheld until the release of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time 3D in 2011. New iterations of multiple series hit the DS in 2007 and early 2008, including Castlevania, Kirby, Advanced Wars, Pokemon, Fire Emblem, and more. New ideas and series were still coming to the system. Square Enix released The World Ends With You on the Nintendo DS in July of 2007. The unique RPG won over many fans with its alternative art style and dual-screen gameplay. Square Enix supported the DS further with updated ports and remakes of some of their most beloved classic games, including Chrono Trigger in 2008 and a full 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV in 2007. One of the most unique games to come out during this time period was Guitar Hero on Tour. The Guitar Hero series was riding high in the late 2000s thanks to their unique guitar-shaped controllers. For the Nintendo DS, the developers at Vicarious Visions created a new peripheral for the Nintendo DS that hooked up via the Game Boy Advance port at the bottom of the system. It featured the Guitar Hero series' iconic button layout and had players strum on a digital guitar on the bottom screen while playing. With a solid library of titles and continually high sales, the DS was on top of the world. For years, Nintendo dominated the mobile gaming market. After knocking out its biggest competitors in the late 80s and early 90s, no one seemed to be able to stop Nintendo. Even Sony, who had entered the console market in 1994 and beat back Nintendo's GameCube and Nintendo 64, couldn't compete with the Nintendo DS. But things were about to change. In June 2007, Apple revealed a new device to the world that would change more than just handheld gaming. The iPhone, a smartphone developed by Apple, would be the catalyst of change for technology and entertainment. The new cell phone offered a touchscreen, similar to that with the Nintendo DS, but required no stylus. The phone was small and sleek. It came with cellular services, including calling and texting. But the Trojan horse of the iPhone was the App Store. Released along the first iPhone, the iOS App Store quickly changed the way many casual consumers played their games. No longer were you required to bring an entirely separate system to entertain yourself on a commute to work or a quick restroom break. While the App Store housed many different programs, games quickly caught fire on the service. Early hits like Angry Birds, Cut the Rope, and Fruit Ninja took the world by storm. Titles were simple, quick, and most importantly, cheap. Usually only costing a few dollars, games on the App Store were downloaded hundreds upon thousands of times. Compared to the typical $30 to $40 release of a Nintendo DS game, the App Store was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Big-name developers quickly jumped on board, with EA, Ubisoft, Konami, and more developing titles from their popular game series for the platform. The mobile gaming wave didn't start there, as new smartphones quickly entered the market alongside new products like Apple's iPad and iPod Touch. These all-in-one devices cut into the handheld gaming market and left a big impact on the development of Nintendo's next iteration of the Nintendo DS. In October of 2008, Nintendo unveiled their next version of the Nintendo DS, known as the Nintendo DSi. The DSi began development in late 2006, after the DS Lite was released. Nintendo wanted to fix many of the complaints that people had about the original Nintendo DS, while also including features that would become popular on other electronic devices in the coming years. One early idea for the system was to include 2 separate card slots for Nintendo DS games, so players wouldn't have to change their cartridges as often. Another idea was to release 2 different models of the handheld, the other being a larger variation of the DSi. While these features wouldn't be available on the standard DSi, the new system did come with many new features. The DSi included an SD card slot for storage. This SD card could hold pictures taken by the DSi's 2 cameras, one on top of the system and the other being hidden within the clamshell hinges. Downloadable games were another huge addition. By accessing the DSiWare shop, players had access to original games and downloadable content for existing software. The DSi included various software applications as well, including an internet browser and DSi Sound, a sound creation tool. The DSi did come with one major omission from previous Nintendo DS systems. Game Boy Advance games would no longer be playable on the system, as Nintendo omitted a separate slot for these titles. The DSi launched in Japan in late 2008 before being released throughout the rest of the world in April of 2009. In North America, the system retailed for $169.99 and came out the same day as the Nintendo published game Rhythm Heaven. The improvements that the DSi brought to the table were praised by fans, but many missed the Game Boy Advance cart slot, as it affected many already released Nintendo DS titles like Guitar Hero and Pokemon. Nintendo continued to pump out new games for the system throughout 2008 and 2009, with follow-ups in the Legend of Zelda series and Mario & Luigi. In March of 2009, Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, one of the highest rated titles ever released for the Nintendo DS. Despite heavy competition from the PSP and mobile phones, excellent titles were still hitting Nintendo's dual-screen handheld. In late 2006, Square Enix made a monumental announcement for RPG and Nintendo DS fans everywhere. The next installment in the long-running Dragon Quest series would be coming exclusively to the Nintendo DS in 2007. Historically, the Dragon Quest series was released on Nintendo platforms before jumping ship to the PlayStation in the early 2000s. The flagship RPG series was incredibly popular in Japan, but always struggled to gain traction in the United States. Dragon Quest VIII, the previous entry in the series, was the first to use the Dragon Quest title in North America, with previous games using Dragon Warrior. While many Western gamers may not have been too excited for a new Dragon Quest, Japanese players celebrated the release of each new one with a lot of fanfare. Development for the title was rough, despite being less powerful hardware than the previous entry. In mid-2007, Square Enix announced that the title would be delayed into 2008. Dragon Quest IX was shown in full at the Tokyo Game Show in 2008, although once again, the title would be delayed. The new release date was March 2009, but it wouldn't release until July 11th. The launch of the 9th installment of the Dragon Quest series would see a spike in Nintendo DS sales in Japan, with over 2 million people pre-ordering the game. By March of 2010, Dragon Quest IX sold more than 4 million copies before being released in any other regions. North America received the game in July of 2010, a year after Japan. Dragon Quest IX was released in PAL territories a few weeks later. Critical reception was high for the title, and it managed to sell well outside its native country, with around 1 million units shipped. Dragon Quest IX is the best-selling third-party release for the Nintendo DS, and the 14th best-selling game on the system overall. By the end of the 2000s, the Nintendo DS was the most prominent gaming console on the market, but it was beginning to show its age. Nintendo's competitors wouldn't hold back for long, and luckily, a successor was already in the works. Thanks for watching. This is the third part in a multi-part series about the Nintendo DS. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, and subscribe when the next episode comes out next week. In the final part of this series, we'll be looking at the last days of the Nintendo DS and the legacy it left behind.